From the beginning of the 18th until the late 19th century, the Comanche Empire ruled the southern plains of what was becoming the United States of America. Initially clashing with rival native tribes, they ultimately had to face the onslaught of colonial settlers encroaching on their land and wiping out one of their most valuable resources, the bison of the plains. This is Comancheria, the rise and fall of the Comanche Empire from GMT Games. You're watching What Does That Piece Do? And in this video, I'll try to answer the question, are these pieces for you? Hello everyone, welcome once again to What Does That Piece Do? My name is Joe. Today I'm going to be kicking off a new series that I'm going to call Are These Pieces For You? Where I'm actually going to review a game, give my impression of it, my interpretation of it, what I liked, what I didn't like, try and relate this to whatever your gaming experience might be, what you're looking for, figure out, is this game really for you? And today I'm going to be looking at Comancheria by GMT Games, designed by Joel Toppin. It's a solo game. It's about the Comanche Empire between 1700 and roughly 1875, and it's all about them trying to survive amidst these incoming forces of colonial empires trying to take over their space, take over their land, take over their way of life. All the while, Comanche are battling with other indigenous tribes in the region. I'm going to take you through a really quick overview of how to play it at a very high level. This isn't going to be like one of my structured teaches that you may be used to seeing on this channel, but at least give you a sense of the flow of the game. I'll talk about, again, what I liked, what I didn't like, and a little bit more about storytelling when it comes to stories about Native North Americans and how they show up in games like these. But before I get into this, starting with the overview, please do hit like and subscribe. I wouldn't want you to miss a thing as I cover more and more topics in games like this. So without further ado, let's get into an overview of Comancheria. So here we have the game set up. I'm actually a couple turns into a scenario already. This is one of the later scenarios. It actually uses the last two history cards and the last two eras of the game. And based on the setup that it says on the card and on the playbook, this is pretty much what it would look like, but there might be a couple variations because some of the stuff is kind of randomized by card draws and by dice rolls. One of the things that may be a variable is where you actually place your rancherias. At the beginning of the scenario, you get 3, and I've given some choice on where to put them. This is where mine ended up. Basically, on your turn, what you're going to be doing is most likely activating one of these rancherias. You only get to activate one at a time, but when you do, you activate all the bands in that rancheria. So you can activate, those bands can take some actions. Or on your turn, you may be collecting culture points based on how many rancherias you have out on the map. Those are good. They're going to be currency to help buy some cards in the passage of time phase. Or you may be able to convert those culture points into military points, which are also going to be very handy down the road. Or another option that you have is to do something called planning. That'll allow you to move some rancherias around, also take a couple other actions, get some more action points too. Those are kind of handy when you've got some pieces that are, some bands that are actually just scattered somewhere on the map. You need to activate them in a certain way. But anyway, let's take a look first at the actions you would do. Say I wanted to activate this rancheria over here, this A1. What it would do then is I'd activate it. I'd take all the bands there, or as many bands as I can, that would fit on this section of the track, just to the left of this guy here. He's your parable. Right, so we'd be then activating these pieces. We probably want to include some horses with them because they're going to help us move around the map. And in some cases, we might want to include the actual headman to go along with them because he may beef up some of their powers. There's a couple things they can do there. From that spot, they use movement points to move along the dotted or straight lines here. They can do something like hunt. They can hunt the bison, basically move into that space, take a bison. They now have control of it. The bison's worth 1 food point. They're going to come in handy later, or they may be able to be traded, which is another action. You can take one of the pieces that has some items to trade and go to one of the settlements or one of the other tribes and do a trade action there. Then you can get even more useful things like food, which is worth 2 food points, 2 population points later on in the game. But you might want to do something a little bit nastier. You might want to go to one of these settlements or one of these tribes and raid them. Now, when you do a raid, you're going to pull a certain amount of these chits out of a cup. And ideally, what's going to happen is you're going to pull a success chip, which will allow you to collect an item from there. Or if you pull these enemy action point chips, what's going to happen is that's going to go down to the available enemy action points that they're going to be able to use when it's the enemy's turn to respond. So the more of those ones you pull, the worse it is. But hopefully you get a success, because when you do a raid and you are successful, you'll be able to place at least one of these ravage tokens on there. Now that'll be good, because that'll thwart the enemy from actually potentially being able to take their actions, and it might actually remove that settlement later on, as you'll see in the passage of time phase. So those are essentially the actions you can do. Oh, and by the way, if you did for whatever reason want to not activate that band, what you could do is you could just turn it over to its finished side. By the way, when these pieces are done, they'll be marked as finished. Turn it to its finished size, just return it back to the rancheria, and then you can collect that many action points for however many empty spaces there are to the left of that space. But ultimately what happens is all the pieces that end up with a rancheria, when they're finished, go to that rancheria. Now it may be the same rancheria, or it might be a different one that they move to. But ultimately you can then take those resources and put them in that rancheria at the end of that turn. Now the enemy's going to get a chance to respond. When the enemy responds, you're going to look at how many action points are available at the bottom here, or also along the general track along the side. Based on that, the enemy depends on which enemy you roll the dice for. What I like to do is roll 2 dice. I like to roll a blue one, for example, to select which enemy it's going to be. It's dictated along the history card here, and then this other one selects which of these chits is actually going to change. So say, for example, I rolled a 3 and a 2. The 3, in this case, would indicate the south is going to be activated, but the 2 column is going to flip this chit. So it'll flip over, it'll have a different instruction on the other side. All these instructions are different. You're going to work your way from the top down to the bottom, and they all do different things. So subjugate, for example, that means that the enemy is going to remove one of the gray tribes. Those are other Native American tribes that are on the map. Their pieces are going to be removed. Culture means that the enemy is going to hit you for culture points and take them away. Settle means that the enemy is going to place one of their settlements in place. By the way, if they go to subjugate and they can't for whatever reason, if there's not enough tribes on the map, they're actually just going to do a settle. War, that means a war column starts in one of the enemy spaces. They're going to start charging towards you. Peace means, well, that peace may be enacted, so it actually remove the war, or it might just put that space at peace so that they're easier to trade with in certain actions. You've got hunt, so now they're going to start hunting your buffalo, whether it's another native tribe or one of the other enemies here. And then ally, this is the one thing that the other tribes can do. They can ally with you, then you can kind of work with them a little bit more, maybe even move them around their map if you've got certain actions or certain powers. By the way, all these enemies, they're all represented differently throughout different stages of the game. Could be the Spanish, could be Mexicans, could be Texas, or it could be the US. It'll change throughout the game as you go through the different history cards. Remember when I said that having a ravaged token on one of their settlements is good? If they go to take an action and they have a ravaged token on their settlement, then that means that they're going to have to try and remove that first. And it's going to be based on a die roll, as mentioned on the history card. So that's going to be that action then, instead of the action that is on the chit. But basically what happens when that chit is activated, say they got to enact this for the 3 enemy action points at the bottom, you'd slide it over to inactive. Then if you had another one you could do, well, you'd slide that just below it. Now when they shuffle through, they're going to go down to the bottom of that column. So now you get some variation between the chits flipping over and the way they're moving around as they're selected. You're going to get quite a bit of variation. You can kind of see what's coming, but you got to stay on your toes because this could change really at any minute. Now we go through all that. Now at the top of the turn, really what you're supposed to do is supposed to check to see if there's a war column. In this case, we've got a war column coming from the north. This is the other native tribes here. What you're going to do first is select a card from the war event deck. You're going to check the movement at the top, so any war columns that are out there, they'll move that much towards the closest rancheria by them that they can see. So it's not across the dotted lines, across all the solid lines though. Then you will roll a dice for each war column that's on the map. If it's lower than their strength, then well, it's going to reduce the strength of that war column by 1. Then you'll pull another card and you'll read the text along the bottom. It may have a lasting effect or immediate impact, something to do with the war columns or how you can interact and engage with the war columns. So that's how you start. Then you get to take your action, again, activating a Rancheria or passing for culture or doing the planning phase. With each step, you'll be moving this chit forward. When it gets to the numbered steps, then you're going to start to roll a die after each turn. And if it's equal to or less than that number, you're going to do the passage of time step at the end of that cleanup turn. Passage of time then is where a bunch of other things will happen on the map. You'll be able to create new rancherias. Say if there was a band out here in no man's land, you could create a new rancheria from there. You can also grow the strength of your band. Say, for example, if they did have something with a population number on it, you could then beef that up from, say, a 1 to a 2, or from a 2 to a 3. You can also add new bands to that rancheria. You can go through a few other steps where you may be retiring and removing some of these headmen here, but beefing up the strength of other things. And also, if you've got any ravage tokens on the settlements or tribes, you'll get to remove those pieces from the map, so it'll clear up some more space for you. It's actually going to help you out in the long run. You'll be maybe putting more bison on the board, you'll be drawing some new development cards and reacting to those, and some you can even buy on your turns. And with your culture points now, you'll actually be able to buy more of these culture cards, which, by the way, I start off with a handful of those at the beginning of this scenario. So these are great. They're going to add you the things that you can do, give you a bit more capabilities and a bit more options along the way. You're always going to have to buy the first one of whatever type it is before buying the second one, third. They cost that a number of points, 1, 2, or 3 culture points. So you're going to start slowly be building up your strength of the things you can do as you go. And you're going to keep playing in that way. Every time you do a passage of time, you're going to move that along the operations track until finally you get to the final step, and that's where you will do a victory check to see if you have succeeded on that history card. If there's another history card to come after that one in the scenario you're playing, then you pull that one out, see what it tells you to do, and then continue on with the game. And then you're going to have to meet the victory conditions on that history card when it's flipped over. Okay, so there's your very brief overview on how the game is played. Again, just to give you a sense of the flow. Wasn't a full teach. Maybe I'll do a full teach in the future. We'll see. But for starters, let me get into some of the stuff that was kind of hard for me to grasp or really get into the game. As you probably noticed, it's very mechanical and very procedural. You've got so many different little slots and tracks to kind of move things around, and a lot of steps to take as you go through the operations and the cleanup phase and the passage of time. There's some very, very verbose player aids too, which I had to reference a lot to begin with and have to keep looking at them every once in a while. Start to get to the point where I could do quite a few things without looking at them, but still, there's a lot going on there. On top of all that stuff to read, then, you've got all these different cards that are popping up, whether they're the development cards, the culture cards you can take into your hand, some of these development cards you can take into your hand too. You got to remember what's on the history card and what's on the war column cards too. On top of all the things that are in the playbook and the rule book, well, it's kind of evolving as you go. There's new stuff popping up all the time. You got to be hyper aware of all the things around you, and there is a lot around you. It's got a very sort of war game mentality superimposed over this, story of indigenous survival. Yeah, there's wars and raids though, but it's very kind of mechanical in that operational aspect. Been looking at the map, there's some very straight lines and very, uniform looking spaces here that you got to follow along. Even this one space here, the Palo Duro Canyon, doesn't look much like a canyon to me. It's just another hex with some dotted lines going in, so I don't really get a sense of, hey, that's a canyon that some of your rancherias might want to hide out in throughout the game, but there it is. Again, the very kind of war game style and design that's put on here, right down to the different chits and whatnot too. Probably talk a little bit more about the map in an upcoming video I want to do on map art and design like I've done in the past, but for now, there's some really neat stuff going on here, but it doesn't really give me a sense of the lands. I mean, this is the plains, I guess, so that's kind of what it looks like. So you do have to take your time with this game. I mean, I'm glad it's a solo game, so you can sort of ponder your next move and whatnot. I'd hate to have that back and forth with a two-player game, kind of constantly waiting for whatever the next person's formation is going to be and what their activations are going to be. But that's part of the beauty of it. So let me get into some of the pros now. It's great if you can set this game up if you've got the time and space to just sort of leave it for a while. I can't imagine getting through an entire scenario, including the big scenario, in just one sitting. You kind of have to sit and let it breathe because there's so much going on. At some point, you're really going to have to contemplate, what is your next move going to be? What are you going to do to save your people? Are you going to move some of your rancherias around? You're going to try and build up your culture? Are you going to go on the offensive and attack? Hey, the war column's coming at you. You can see it. It's way off in the distance, but what does that mean to you and your decisions that you make next? It's great if you can just sort of sit and soak it in and really understand what your next decision should be. And I've had this set up for days where I'm just kind of thinking about, what am I going to do next? And if you've got the headspace for that, as well as the table space, I think that's a great experience for me anyway. That's what I really wanted to get out of this. It's like reading a good book and all these heavy decisions that have to be made. Like you got to stew on it. You just got to sit with it for a little bit. So I thought that was pretty amazing. It's a very immersive and engrossing narrative. Something that I've been looking for in a lot of games that really make you kind of digest and understand what is at stake here. Especially considering the fact that this isn't just a standard war game about two armies going at it. These are completely different cultures that are starting to clash. You'll also notice with this game, there's no specific individuals on the map that you can name, like no generals or no native chiefs or anything like that. Some of the names will come up on the cards that pop up, but there's no characters on here. It is totally a sandbox, and you totally get to be the character. And you're fighting up against these faceless enemies that just have a flag and a certain amount of strength. You don't know or understand too much about them, but you know that they are coming for you. It doesn't try to lionize or demonize any specific individuals through history. I think there's something really interesting and special about that. As much as it tries to represent a history, it's kind of wide open playing field, and a bunch of different things can happen, and you're not focused on the characters, but on the feeling and the mood itself. So when I first started in tabletop gaming, I was really attracted to stories or settings set in history, to learn a little bit more about that history. And I was particularly interested in learning more about other cultures that I'm just not as aware of, or I didn't grow up learning about necessarily, especially native and indigenous cultures here in North America. So there's a lot of games out there that try to incorporate indigenous folks, but sometimes they're just kind of sprinkled in there, like weather, like I say, or just as a theme, kind of pasted on. It's not treated that seriously. A lot of these games, let's be honest, designed by white middle class, mostly European, North American folks, guys specifically, right? So that's kind of just endemic in this whole board game design world. And more often than not, those people are probably not scholars in the cultures that they're representing. So if you can imagine my excitement when I see games like Navajo Wars or Comancheria here, is designed by Joel Toppin, that really seem to treat the subject matter that much more seriously. It really allows you to sink your teeth into the culture and the history here. Well, that said, Joel Toppin, the designer here, he's not indigenous, he's not native, he's a white guy. He has lived among indigenous tribes for much of his life. I believe it's the Blackfoot of Montana, around their reservations. But still, when I go to tell people that aren't gamers, and they're socially conscious about different cultures and being sensitive to those cultures and their stories as they're being told, if I tell them, hey, I'm playing this game about the Comanche Empire and I'm trying to fight off settlers as they encroach upon their land, it's designed by a white guy who lives among natives, but through his church has been exposed to them. It's going to raise a few eyebrows because, let's be honest, the church does not have the best history with natives of North America. Let me just state this right away, right now. I'm not out to cancel Joel for any cultural appropriation, whatever we think that word means, cancel culture, whatever. Let's take a breath here. I really want to commend him for the amazing work that he's done on this game. But I do still think there's a conversation to be had about who gets to tell these stories, especially about natives, or about any marginalized people in general. Especially in the more ubiquitous forms of media, like say movies, books, television, there is a lot of attention now being paid to who actually gets to tell the story. So I'll give you an example. Right now in theaters, as of the taping of this video, is Killers of the Flower Moon, which is a movie by Martin Scorsese. It does focus a lot on the Native American experience in the early 1900s, which is great. We get to hear these stories. These stories are being told. And there's more and more native indigenous actors popping up in these movies and these films and these books and these TV shows. Great. But still, who's going to be getting all the accolades at the end of the day? It's probably going to be Martin Scorsese, a white man, or his white screenplay writer, or the white male novelist that wrote the book. Still, great that these stories are being told, but we really have to look at how can we hear the voices of the people, that they get to tell their own story. We want to see more and more of that. I would like to see that encouraged a lot more. I look forward to the day where an indigenous writer, director, and a whole cast of indigenous actors can get the accolades that a movie like Killers of the Flower Moon is getting right now, and we can really celebrate their stories as told by them. Just like I would like to see games like this designed by Native and Indigenous folks so they get to tell their story. And again, I don't want to stop Joel from any work he's going to do on any future games in this sort of realm, but it's just something that we need to start thinking about. So obviously there's a huge difference between a blockbuster film in the theaters right now and a niche game from a niche small company like GMT. It's like they're not raking in the big bucks that Scorsese is, the folks at GMT or Joel. All right, let's be honest about that, but there's still something to be said about who gets to tell that story. Now, the counter argument to all this, either when we're talking about movies or we're talking about games like this, is especially Killers of the Flower Moon, Comancheria, they are about Native and Indigenous trauma. So we can't always be relying on Indigenous folks to have to tell those stories over and over again, especially when they've had to live them or their ancestors have had to live them, all right? It's not on them to always educate us folks that know less about their culture, that haven't been through what they've been through, all right? So there's definitely some merit to that, of someone taking that on and putting together these stories or these games so that us that need a better sense of understanding can gain that sense of understanding. Absolutely, we want to hear about the lived experience as much as possible, but sometimes those folks, they want to be telling stories of joy and stories of thriving, not just surviving. And we're seeing more and more of that. We're seeing shows like Reservation Dogs, which is really focused on the Indigenous experience. Some of it's sad, some of it's happy, some of it's just downright goofy or fun.
Aho! Young warrior!
Are you Crazy Horse or sitting?
No. I'm not one of those awesome guys. No, I'm more of your unknown warrior.
We get to hear more and more of those types of stories, and we're seeing more of that in games too. Like we've got Winter Rabbit is one coming out. It was on the Zenobia Awards circuit from 2021 by Will Thompson, and it's about Native and Indigenous cultures pre-colonial settler age and them being able to survive in their own way. So we're seeing more and more of those. Of course, I'm going to continue to keep getting gravitated towards games like this that are about conflict because I think it helps me understand the world, but hey, they're not for everyone. I get that. But back to the point that I ultimately wrestle with when playing a game like this, is it okay to play and enjoy a game that tries to tell an honest story about the Comanche people when it was designed and presented by someone that isn't from that culture specifically? Well, for now, it'll have to do. I mean, let's be honest. Like I said off the top, there's a lot of these games are still being designed by a lot of middle to upper class white men. I mean, that's just kind of what the board game, especially the war game industry, has attracted. Like most of the folks, myself included, we've got more access to leisure time. We can play these games, get more access to the designers, get inspired to design, and have the time to design on our own, right? So that's just kind of a fact. That's why things like the Zenobia Award exist, to kind of broaden the landscape to who gets to show up and tell the story. But for now, I think this is a great offering to that discussion, into that narrative. And I don't discourage Joel from going and doing what he wants to do next, especially around Native cultures. Yeah, I want to learn more. Absolutely. But I do hope that this really opens the door for more people to be able to tell their stories from their culture. We can hear from them directly. I think that's what we should be shooting for in the long run. I believe this game is a stepping stone towards that, and I can't wait to see what comes next. Maybe there is a chance to sort of inject a bit more Indigenous eyes and ears or ideas to this game. Like I said, the map, it's got some neat looking, I guess, native themed elements in there, but wouldn't it be great to actually get a native artist to design this? Or maybe offer something a bit more to some of the other procedures in here, like planning and passage of time. I know there's a few indigenous words put in here, but could use a little bit more. It might help us understand it and learn a bit more too. Just something to sort of add that essence of, authenticity from the people that, are really being talked about here and really being explored. So ultimately, that was what I was trying to get out of this game and the sort of thought process I went through when playing it and enjoying it. This might be the game for you. Hopefully this will help you decide or figure out if you want to really spend the time to get your hands dirty with this game. I think it was truly worth it. Like I say, it took me a while to get into, but once I did, it really started to click, and it's something that I like to come back and revisit now and again. So again, hopefully this helps you decide then. Let me know. Let me know in the comments. Have you played this game? Do you want to play this game, or are you still a little intimidated by the rules and the overhead here? Let me know. Maybe there is a teach in the future on this channel, but for now, hope you do enjoy this, and hope to see you at the table, or hope that you get to the table and play this yourself someday. So take care. Thanks for watching.